Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Ozcast.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we've got a really fascinating one for you guys. We're going to be diving into some research about China's investments in Colombia.
Oh, yeah.
We've got reports, articles, even some think tank publications, all talking about how China has been quietly but very strategically investing in Colombia's infrastructure. You might be surprised by what we found.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that raises some eyebrows when you start to see how much is going on. Most people just aren't aware of how extensive these investments really are, but to really understand what's happening, we need to look beyond just like the dollar amounts, you know?
Right. So we've got info on everything from ports and highways to mines and energy projects.
Yeah.
It's a lot to unpack, so where do we even begin?
Well, one of the first things that stood out to me was the timeline.
Okay.
These investments didn't just sort of appear overnight. You know, we can trace a lot of this activity back to about 2008, right around the time when China's global influence really started to ramp up.
So this has been a long game for them.
It really seems that way. And the scope of these investments suggests they have a pretty clear vision, you know, for Colombia's role in their overall strategy.
Okay, that's fascinating. I have to admit, I'm still a bit lost on the why here.
Sure.
Why Colombia?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one we'll be exploring throughout this whole deep dive. But one thing that jumps out from these sources is Colombia's strategic location.
Yeah.
You know, it has coastlines on both the Atlantic and the Pacific,
Right.
Making it a potential gateway between Asia and the Americas.
Ah, so it's all about access.
Access resources, influence. You know,
Also-
Colombia is rich in natural resources, things like coal, oil, gold, even emeralds.
Wow.
And for a country like China, which is hungry for raw materials to fuel its growth, you know,
Right.
Colombia looks pretty appealing.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's look at some specifics now.
Okay.
One of the reports we have dives deep into China's interest in developing ports in Colombia's Urabá region. And there's one project in particular, the Sol de Oriente project.
Yeah.
That really caught my eye.
That one is something else. It's not just a port. It's this massive complex they're proposing.
Wow.
With thousands of warehouses, a seaport capable of handling the world's largest container ships and airport.
Yeah.
They even have plans to teach locals Mandarin.
Hold on. They're planning to teach Mandarin.
Yeah.
That's ambitious.
Right. It gives you a sense of the scale and long-term vision behind this project. You know, they're not just thinking about moving goods. They're thinking about establishing like a significant Chinese presence in the region.
It almost sounds like they're trying to create a mini China on Colombian soil. But isn't there already a major port in Colombia? What about Buenaventura on the Pacific coast?
Yes. And guess what? China has shown interest in that one too.
Really?
They've actually signed agreements to invest in Buenaventura as well.
So they're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly. They're seeking multiple entry points to Colombia's resources and trade routes.
I see.
And that's where the highways come in.
Right, the highways. We have a whole stack of information on those. It's like they're trying to connect all these ports to the rest of the country.
That's precisely what they're doing. One example that really illustrates this is the Autopista al Mar 2 project,
Okay.
a highway connecting Medellin to those Euroports we were just talking about.
Okay, I remember reading about that one. It was built by a Chinese company, right?
Yes, a consortium led by the China Harbor Engineering Company. But here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
Thousands of Chinese workers were brought in for this project.
Thousands. That's a lot more than just engineers and managers, right?
Exactly. It raises a pretty big question. You know, why bring in so many workers from China when unemployment is a concern in Colombia?
Is this about like a skills gap or is there something else going on?
That's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder who really benefits from these projects. Are they creating jobs and opportunities for Colombians, or are they primarily serving Chinese interests?
Right.
You know, it's...
Yeah. It makes you think.
Yeah.
So we've talked about ports and highways, but these sources also reveal that China's investments in Colombia go way beyond just infrastructure.
Right.
We're talking energy mining, even public transportation.
It's really a multi-sector approach, which I think gives you a sense of how deeply they're trying to embed themselves in the Colombian economy, you know?
Yeah, one area that really stood out to me was the energy sector.
Okay.
I mean, we've got reports on hydroelectric dams, gas pipelines,
Yeah.
solar panel projects. It's all over the map.
And the stories behind some of these projects are pretty intriguing.
Yeah.
Like take the Talasa hydroelectric dam, for example.
Okay.
It's slated for the Atrato River, which runs through the Chaco province.
Right.
Now, this region is already facing a lot of environmental challenges from illegal mining and drug trafficking. So adding a massive dam to the mix is, well, controversial, to say the least.
Yeah, I can imagine. So how did a Chinese company get involved in this project?
Well, it's a bit of a winding road. The project was initially developed by two Colombian companies, but then it was acquired by a consortium that includes the China Three Gorges Corporation, one of the world's largest hydroelectric power developers.
Okay.
And get this, the deal involved transfers in major financial hubs like New York City, Bogota, Hong Kong, even the Cayman Islands.
Okay, that sounds a little shady. Like, why all the secrecy?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's a question that comes up again and again with these Chinese investments. It's hard to get a clear picture of who's really benefiting from these projects.
And it makes you wonder if those benefits are being shared equally,
Right.
especially when you consider the potential environmental impact in a region like Chico.
Exactly. And this theme of balancing development with environmental protection is one we see playing out in another dam project, the Hedro Ituango Dam.
Oh, right. I remember reading about that one. It faced some major setbacks, didn't it?
It did. In 2018, the dam almost collapsed due to mismanagement and alleged corruption. It was a huge mess, and guess who stepped in to help salvage the project?
Let me guess, a Chinese company.
You got it, a consortium led by Yellow River Co. Ltd. And Power China International Group Limited won the bid to finish the project.
Huh.
So, it seems they're not just building new things, they're also stepping in to fix what others couldn't.
It's like they're the global fix-it crew swooping in with their deep pockets and expertise.
And that's where things get interesting. Are they genuinely helping, or are they capitalizing on situations where others have failed? And what kind of leverage does that give them? It's something to think about.
Definitely. So it's not just dams. They're also involved in solar energy, right?
Yes.
I think I saw something about Trina Solar in these reports.
Trina Solar Energy, a state-owned Chinese company, has been popping up in connection with several solar park projects in Colombia. But what's strange is that their involvement is kind of ambiguous.
Okay.
At first, they claimed they had no active projects in Colombia. Then all of a sudden, announcements about their involvement in specific solar parks started appearing.
So mixed messages, that doesn't sound very transparent.
It makes it hard to get a handle on what they're really up to, doesn't it? And this lack of clarity extends to their involvement in Bogota's metro system as well.
Oh, the Bogota Metro, that's a massive undertaking. Didn't the Chinese company win the bid for that too?
They did. The China Harbor Engineering Company, the same one behind the Autopista Omar 2 project, is leading a consortium to build the metro system. But this project has also faced its fair share of scrutiny.
What kind of scrutiny?
Well, the Comptroller General's office actually launched an investigation because they were concerned that the proposal hadn't been properly vetted by engineers.
So potential shortcuts being taken.
It's certainly a red flag, especially when you consider the scale and complexity of a project like this.
And speaking of transportation projects, there's also that light rail system they're planning to connect towns east of Bogota to the capital's metro system.
Yes, the Ferrea de Occidente project. That one's fascinating because of the tangled web of ownership and shareholding involved.
Okay, this sounds complicated.
The project was awarded to a consortium that's majority controlled by the China Civil Engineering Construction Corporation. But there's also a local company involved, Empresa Ferrea Regional, which was initially presented as a key partner. However, audits later revealed discrepancies in share ownership with other entities, including a television network holding significant stakes.
Wait, a television network? What does a television network have to do with a light rail project?
That's the thing. It's not clear. It all creates a rather opaque picture of who's really calling the shots and who's stands to benefit the most. And this lack of clarity, as we've seen, is a recurring theme in many of these Chinese investments.
It's definitely a pattern.
Yeah.
So we've got the arrival of Chinese engineers for both the metro and light rail projects, this confusing ownership structure with the Ferrea de Occidente, and then you've got projects like the Talasa Dam with all those international financial transfers. It's starting to feel a bit like a puzzle with pieces scattered everywhere.
And that's the challenge. How do we put all these pieces together to get a clearer picture of what's really going on?
Well, maybe looking at one more project might help the Union del Sur project, a highway connecting Colombia's road network to Ecuador.
Okay.
This one also has some financial ambiguity, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, right. The Union-Dasuo project was initially shrouded in secrecy, but eventually it came out that the Bank of China was one of the financial backers.
It seems like every time we uncover one layer of this story, we find another layer of complexity underneath. It's like peeling back an onion, but instead of tears, we just get more questions.
And that's precisely what makes this deep dive so compelling.
Yeah.
You know, we're not just looking at individual projects. We're trying to understand the larger forces at play, the motivations, the implications, and ultimately what this all means for Colombia.
Right. We've talked about ports, highways, mines, dams, even solar panels, and public transportation. It's clear that China is making a big bet on Colombia. But the big question remains, why?
Well, we've touched on some of the possible reasons. You know, Colombia's strategic location, its abundance of natural resources, the potential for economic growth. But I think there's something deeper at play here.
What do you mean?
I think China sees Colombia as a key piece in its larger global strategy.
Okay.
A strategy that's often referred to as the Belt and Road Initiative. Have you heard of that?
Vaguely, yeah. It's basically China's plan to build this massive network of infrastructure projects connecting Asia to Europe, Africa, and even South America, right?
Exactly. And Colombia, with its Pacific and Atlantic coastlines, its proximity to the Panama Canal, and its potential as a transportation hub, you know, it fits perfectly into that vision.
So they're not just investing in Colombia, they're investing in their own global ambitions.
Precisely. And that's why it's so important to understand the implications of these investments for Colombia. Are they truly beneficial, or are they creating new forms of dependency?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, after reviewing all these sources, I'm not sure I have a clear answer.
And that's okay. There are no easy answers when it comes to something as complex as this. But I think one thing is clear. Colombia needs to be very strategic in how it manages this relationship with China.
What do you mean?
Well, for starters, they need to demand more transparency. You know, we've seen time and again how these deals are often shrouded in secrecy,
Right.
making it difficult to assess their true costs and benefits.
And that lack of transparency can breed mistrust, right? Not just between governments, but also between the government and the people.
Absolutely. And it can also create opportunities for corruption. You know, when deals are made behind closed doors, it's harder to hold people accountable.
So more transparency is key, but what else can Colombia do to ensure that these investments benefit its people and its future?
Well, I think they need to be very careful about becoming too reliant on China. If all your eggs are in one basket, you're vulnerable if that basket breaks.
So diversification is important.
Absolutely. Colombia needs to continue to build relationships with other countries, diversify its economy, and invest in its own people and infrastructure.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act.
It is, but I think it's a balancing act that Colombia is capable of navigating if it approaches this relationship with China strategically and with its own interests at heart.
And honestly, that might be the biggest takeaway from this whole deep dive, the importance of awareness. We need to be aware of what's happening, ask critical questions, and demand transparency from our leaders.
I completely agree. The more informed we are, the better equipped we are to make decisions that benefit everyone, not just a select few.
This has been an incredibly eye-opening deep dive. We've uncovered a lot of information, but I think the most important thing we've uncovered is the need for continued conversation and critical thinking.
Well said. And hopefully this deep dive has given our listeners the tools they need to continue exploring this complex and fascinating story.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep diving.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.